So the first thought that probably popped into your head whenever you clicked this video was go touch some grass. And just to prove that I do indeed go outside, I'm in this forest/field area. You can probably hear the birds right now and maybe some cars passing. And I promise to do my best throughout the rest of this video to remain a normal, nature-loving person, at least most of the time. So after the first thought of please go touch some grass, the next thought in your head was probably a slightly sour taste with hints of intellectualism and elitism. And I agree with you there. That's sort of the first thing that pops in my head too. Old French guys, boring assignments, and film professors all sort of go together with that. But somehow they seem to like the taste of film theory. It's sort of their black licorice. And I'll have to admit, I do enjoy black licorice and I do enjoy film theory. So how do I reconcile my love of grass with my love of black licorice? Well, in order to get to that, we first have to understand what exactly film theory is. I think we all sort of instinctively know what film theory is, but much like the trees and bushes that surround me, it's sort of hard to tell where one ends and another begins. We can generally first point to things like gender theory or queer theory, but then what about film philosophy, film criticism, film history? Do all of these things count? And at times, I bet whenever you've read these texts, they do feel more like theory than just a simple historical account. And of course, like I said, we sort of do know what film theory is because we use it all the time when justifying why a shot worked for us, why we enjoyed something, or why a movie's great. We delved into it, but when it comes to that definition, it's really hard. So I've done my best here and come up with a definition that I think works at least most of the time. To me, film theory is anything that seeks to explain a film and its artistic choices, emotional or intellectual impacts and implications. Notice we aren't here to judge value or discuss meanings, and characters and plot sort of take a backseat to the techniques that were used to achieve those effects that it's had on us. Now, this is obviously a broad definition that would encompass all these trees and brush and just debris in general under one umbrella, but I hesitate to draw any strong lines in the sand because to do so would exclude something, like take film criticism for example. We generally think of it as not film theory because it's simply explaining if a movie's good or not and what worked and what didn't in it. But in order to explain why something's good, you probably will have to delve into at least a little bit of theory and practice. You'll have to sort of explain the whys behind its goodness. So now that we have a sort of working definition that, while not perfect, will do the job, let's go ahead and jump into the common critiques I hear of film theory and what we can learn from them. The first major argument I've heard when trying to defend my love of film theory is that it simply doesn't matter. It made sense in the context of a film course or maybe in the context of film history, but I myself, as the average viewer sitting here today, rarely think, does this shot display the male gaze? Or what an interesting way to use a crossfade to imply a loss of time, even though there wasn't any. To me, this is the real please come down to earth and please touch grass argument, because it sees film theory as a sort of passive god sitting above us, offering meaning and explanation, but everything we see already offers enough of an explanation. Our feelings and opinions don't need all this to back them up. Just look at the jump cut, for instance. It's a standardized trick that was revolutionized by Godard, but is now used every day in TikToks. But it's only able to move from special effects trickery to avant-garde statement to everyday use through a process of an awareness of its use and the hope of discovering something new. Of course, some of these advances were just stumbled upon. But once they were stumbled upon, in order to understand why they worked, they had to be evaluated, categorized, and cataloged. And then with every instance after the miraculous discovery, everyone either had to question it or just use it the same way. But in order to use something properly or to question its use, you first have to know what it is and why it worked. Hence, film theory. Basically, all this is just to say that without film theory, progress would be very slow, if not unthinkable, because we have no idea what we're progressing towards or away from. We'd pretty much just be relying on those hypothetical monkeys on typewriters. Even if we never think about it, if it just never crosses our minds, film theory is still there, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and it is essential to moving us, striking us, and changing us in every film we watch. Not only that, but if you've ever explained to someone else why a shot worked for you or a certain cut scared you or moved you, well, you tried black licorice and you liked it. The next major critique I hear of film theory is that it's all based in overthinking. From the audience side of things, this means we're too focused on the details, that what we're examining and looking at wasn't intended and isn't really there. It's nitpicking and finding meaning where there isn't any. And from filmmakers, this often means a critique of losing touch with oneself, losing touch with the stories you want to tell, the audiences you want to reach, and the emotions you want to convey to those audiences through that story. First, let's go ahead and tackle the more general critique of overthinking and pulling detail out of nowhere. To be honest, I completely get this critique, and I think it's something that we've all struggled with at one point or another, whether personally or with someone else. So I think we've all had that friend or maybe even a teacher who tells us that the frame that they're painting on here is in reference to the fact that they're trapped within a frame and that they're too artfully minded. But in reality, it's because they're a painter and that's what their character is, and they're just painting. There's obviously no reason for that to be read into the film. And it's in moments like these where we get lost in the detail that I wish we could just throw film theory out the window. But one bad egg doesn't ruin the dozen. And for the fun of it, let's just say that the teacher was right, that paintings are continuously referenced with a theme of being trapped, so we have to imply that here in this scene. Let's say that the director didn't even intend that. But once again, who's to say that it wasn't subconscious, that it was maybe part of the material they were adapting, or that maybe even it was someone else along the line that said, hey, let's keep referencing this way. Especially in something like film, where there's just so many hands involved, who's to say that someone else didn't make that decision? Of course, this gets tricky because it means that the line between a good reading and a bad reading is a lot thinner than we would like to admit. But with time, we can train that skill and learn to tell more good readings than bad readings. But of course, on top of this, any natural exploration or discovery process is going to have dead ends and bad conclusions. But those don't always end there. For instance, let's say I misused the frame in a film and I misapplied the allegory. Someone else can see how I misapplied it and then fix it in their film. And therefore we now have a new creation, something new that we have to examine now. And it's only through the discovery of how someone did it wrong that we can discover how to do it right. This is how we discover things like the 180-degree rule, and then subsequently break it to great effect. Now let's tackle the peer-to-peer or filmmaker-to-filmmaker critique. The critique that filmmakers who delve too far into theory and ideas get lost in the sauce, make inaccessible, heartless films. And I can speak from experience here because this is something that my love of theory does naturally to me. It puts me in a precarious position where I can value themes and concepts or executional ideas over the actual emotions those are supposed to convey. Now, of course, intellectual films can actually be quite useful. They can sort of cut a path ahead by discarding all the little niceties and the emotions, and they can show us exactly what an idea or a concept or technique can achieve, and then we can go in later and build it out. But intellectual films are a whole another field, and if you're trying to make something emotional, the heart and the mind can often clash. So there's a lot of truth to this critique, and in fact, it's sort of more than I'd like to admit because it shows that just by practicing film theory and looking into it, we can in fact risk the very stories and emotions we want to convey. But, of course, there is a way to keep this in check, which we'll look at shortly. But before that, there's some other negative side effects of this. Firstly, this can just ignore non-narrative and non-commercial films. It doesn't really take them into account. Not only that, but non-narrative and non-commercial films, or films that are trying for an emotion but fail, might execute a great idea. And in fact, these can be some of the most powerful moments we ever see on film because it shows us a new path forward. Sure, it might fail in this one instance, but oftentimes those moments impact me the most because now I can see how to find my own heart and how to add it back into my own stories to execute the idea that someone else wasn't quite able to pull off. We can't say that film theory doesn't matter because it's part of the subconscious ways in which we deal with, understand, and process the films we see, even if we don't directly acknowledge it. Not only that, but the fears of overthinking and losing touch with our emotions are valid ones, but at the end of the day, they can hold back the medium from progress and from discovery. Now it's time for my solutions to these problems, or at least the solutions I've adopted after making every argument and critique that I just listed. So first, let's look at the audience side of things. How do we avoid overanalyzing things or just giving bad readings that aren't supported in the text? Firstly, you are already in a great place if you're worried you might be overthinking or overanalyzing films, because it shows you have a true passion for the medium, and that you want to learn more, discover more, and see it and yourself grow and evolve. What we have to do now is take that passion and train it. If you keep story as your North Star, and then really interrogate why you believe something to be true, don't just say, oh, I think this movie's about this, but really say, is this really there? Am I wanting to see this? If you really interrogate yourself, keep stories your North Star, and then of course, share those ideas that you have with other people, you'll set up an internal and external set of checks and balances that will keep you from saying anything too silly or too dumb. Finally, let's look at what we as filmmakers can do to avoid the pitfalls I mentioned for us. Firstly, we are viewers too. And all of the rules / guidelines / helpful little tips that I just provided for them apply also for us. But now that we've made sure we aren't overthinking things or doing bad readings, we now have to take what we've learned and the ideas that we've stolen and learn to apply them. I'm speaking to the average filmmaker here, the one who wants to make commercial narrative films, like I do. But there's also a side of me that acknowledges the artsy side of things, and the same rules will apply, but they will be a little bit looser. Firstly, make story and emotion your North Star. Have a theme, but don't get into technique too early. Figure out what you want the audience to feel and get that on the page, and then go with the flow from there. But at some point, we all know that we'll end up on shore and the tide will have left us behind. Our emotions won't have the answers anymore, and something just isn't working. A scene isn't working, a character, maybe the whole film. At this point, I would say it's time to bring back in theory and technique a little more. If you want the audience to feel disoriented but can't figure out how to do it like that, just say, well, what if we broke the 180 rule? What if we cut the middle of their line? That's not something we normally do. And these are the moments that can be the genius moments in film. There's something that's like, wow, we've discovered something new. But once you've made that theory call, always try to come back to the emotion of what you're getting across. Is it executing the emotion or is it executing the idea? In other words, you can use theory and technique to sort of fill the gaps in the tide in your emotions. And then once that tide and those emotions come back, you can sort of check the decisions you've made off of theory and technique with that and see if they still work. A quick summary of this is just to say that whenever you learn film theory or choose to incorporate it into a scene or throughout your film, you need to be asking yourself questions. How and why am I going to use this? How could I use this? Why could I use this? And now that I have used it, is it achieving the effect that I wanted it to? And there's one other thing that I want to add here that I think is changed over time. Most film theory is a delayed practice that looks at the past and tries to forge meaning, technique, and ideas out of it and then draw it to the present or maybe project the future. But in the modern age, I think this is changing some just because theories are coming into vogue and then coming out of vogue and being interrogated constantly. But not only that, I think the value of theory is changing as it's becoming more and more relevant to the present. So you might be saying right now, well, I just want to make a good story. I don't really want to focus on all these like minute details that like 5 people are going to notice. I'm going to tell a good story and whatever happens, happens. And I agree with you on a basic level, but I also want to pose to you the question of the modern filmmaker. In this modern age, everyone walks around with a phone on them and can sort of just stumble into a story. Of course, there's a lot of technique and craft that goes into lighting a scene, shooting a scene, exposing properly. But all of that can be learned and is actually being learned by a lot more people more frequently. So what separates your average person from a filmmaker is a little bit less clear. But I think that there is a possible way forward using film theory and technique. Because not everyone is going to have the passion or the time to delve into such a level. Anyone can stumble into a drama or sort of tell a good story for the most part, but to really make that story boundary pushing, have those effects, and really interrogate the ideas that you're putting out there, you're going to want to understand a good bit of theory. You're going to want to understand why shooting it this way has this effect, why cutting it this way has this sort of effect. And with that, you'll separate yourself and allow your talent to shine even brighter. I hope this video has given you more insight into why film theory matters, not just for old men or professors, but also for all of us, really. Of course, this is also just the very beginning of the conversation. It's just my thoughts and my ideas on the topic. And there are many more experts and people who have things to say, great things to say, more intelligent things to say on this. And there's a lot more to unpack and correct me on probably as well in this video. And now that this conversation has been begun, I hope that you'll continue it on your own, whether that be through reading with people you know or in the comments section. And until next time, adios.